Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hi, my name is Melissa Coakley. You may have noticed that I'm not Louise. I'm stepping in for the session today to help out a little bit. I've been a member of TLDC for a few years now. It really was helpful in my own transition, which I'll talk about in the panel discussion in a few days. But I was really excited to monitor this session in particular because Randy Reman is going to talk about the transition from using a contract role to bridge into a permanent role. And that's something that worked beautifully for me. I've seen it work well for a lot of people. So it's great information to have. Just a little about Randy. He's coming to us from Alaska, and he's the Senior HR Learning and Development Coordinator in the transportation and oil industry in Alaska. He's done many different things from military, tourism, higher ed, corporate, and he used to be a teacher of English to speakers of other languages like me, so that's great. At the moment, he's the professional development coordinator with ATD Puget Sound chapter, and he volunteers as well with the Junior Achievement Alaska, and he spends most of his free time outdoors biking, hiking, and skiing, and I'm told taking beautiful pictures that he posts on Instagram. So thank you for being here, Randy. We're excited to have you.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and jump into it. So I wanted to kind of share my experience with bridging the gap between skills that you're looking to develop and getting to a learning development position. So let's see if I can get my slides to advance. So I'll talk a little bit about my background, and then we'll talk about bridge jobs in general and the STAR method kind of to frame some of my sharing of my experiences in the two different contract roles I've been in. And then I'll kind of conclude by wrapping up how that transitioned me into a full-time learning development role. And then we'll take some time for Q&A. So Melissa shared kind of a little bit about my background. So I think it is important to recognize that I did have some work experience coming in before I did transition from teaching English as a second language to L&D. And so I did have some experience as a Army maintenance mechanic on Black Hawk helicopters for about 6 years. So I wasn't completely new to the work sector when I started looking for an L&D role, but I was definitely new to the industries I went into. And this is a photo from the end of the Alaska pipeline in Valdez, Alaska. So one of the things that I think is interesting about L&D as a when you're looking to kind of transition out of teaching and trying to get into an L&D role, there's a lot of information out of there. And I liked what Adam Grant said in his book, Hidden Potential, is like trying to look at multiple different guides and trying to figure out what's your own guide book to getting where you want to go and other paths to explore. So that's kind of what led me to kind of think about this idea of like, what are the different contract roles I've had, and those have kind of paved the way for where I'm at today. So usually when people talk about bridge jobs, there's usually two different ways that people conceptualize them. One is that it might be a bridge job is just a temporary assignment, kind of like if you were to go to a temp agency and take a job that may not be directly related. I think bridge jobs, the way I'm thinking about them, is usually related to the industry you're wanting to go into. They may not be a permanent, like a more role, but it's usually a temporary assignment, but it allows some stability. It allows you to gain new skills, experiences, and the qualifications that'll eventually get you where you want to land. And so that's how I'm kind of framing this idea of a bridge job and how it connects to contract roles. That being said, that there is a lot of people that I've met who do make contract roles their career, and that, so it's not to say that contract roles are just this temporary period of time in their employment. Trying to advance my slides here. So to talk about those two different contract roles, I thought it would be interesting to use a method that a lot of us probably are familiar with when we are interviewing for jobs, and that's the STAR method. And so these are usually, the STAR methods is used to answer behavioral questions where you'll describe the situation or context you're in, and then the different tasks that you were assigned or the challenges that you met, and then what you did to address those challenges. And then out of that experience, what was the result? What did you gain from that? And so I wanted to frame my conversation around these two different contract roles, how they helped build those ID skills that I was looking for that eventually helped me get a full-time development coordinator role. So the first position that I ended up going into was a change management analyst contract role. And this was something that, interestingly enough, I ended up meeting someone from TLDC by doing events like this and volunteering, and Toddy Norum, and she was able to connect me with this role with Cisco Systems, supporting them. And this is a sales enablement role, so primarily supporting the different sales teams using Salesforce. And so they had a need within their business to support changes in the way that they were selling their software and their networking packages to their customers. And so with those updates, they needed people to do communications. And so I'm going to transition here. So they had to do change management communications. Usually that was like sending out these emails through Salesforce Email Studio and posting software video demonstrations of the new software rollouts. And they would also have various meetings with user acceptance testing groups, product owners, project managers. So some of the SME collaboration, I had to get good at doing that with the different groups, and completely new to the IT business. So it was there was a lot of new tasks. And the other thing that I was in charge of was developing their SharePoint site and posting some of those different software demos and change management communications to that as well. So a lot of new things that coming out of higher ed, I was completely new to. Didn't know anything about the IT industry, but this allowed me to get familiar with some of those different new business areas. So the actions I took once I faced these challenges of new tools, new tasks, was I had to do a lot of self-learning. And one of the things about contact roles is that oftentimes you're not provided with as much upskilling support as you might if you were landing a full-time role. It's not always the case, but I found in my experience that you're expected often to hit the ground running. And so I had to do a lot of self-learning, reaching out to people in my network. My friend Toddy Norum with TLDC was really helpful because she was able to connect me with Paul Wilson, who developed Captivate videos. So I was able to learn Adobe Captivate, which is the main tool we're using for developing videos for the software demos. And then I had to reach out to internal SMEs for learning Email Studio, which I didn't really have any experience with Salesforce Email Studio. And then I got to experiment with SharePoint sites for the sales team and develop some skills in designing SharePoint sites. I don't know, it falls under actions, but I really struggled with the lack of support. I think that's one of the things about contract roles is sometimes you're expected to just go right in there, hit the ground running. And so sometimes that was a source of tension between myself and my manager. So coming out of that experience, I did gain some skills in SMEs collaboration and experience with collaborating with SMEs, software training support. I was able to understand how to support teams that needed training around software, new software rollouts, um, and SharePoint and Captivate tool usage. And the last thing is the change management communication, being able to communicate changes, whether it's through emails or SharePoint postings. I was able to kind of learn what you put in those things, and how to strategically communicate some of those things. Um, and like I said earlier, the big thing I recognized coming out of this is when looking for positions that I needed to make sure I had support in place for upskilling for new skill sets. And so that was some of the main takeaways from that first contract role as a change management analyst. And my next role was a content developer. And this was a contract role that started in 2021. I saw after spending that first year, I just moved to Alaska and I was working remotely, and I wanted an actual in-person office job. Um, and so I found a position that I applied for with Chugach Native Corporation. They had a contract role to support Alyeska Pipeline in the HR content development role. This was office-based within the HR department, and so it was on-site, which was really important for me. Some of the different tasks that I was assigned was training video projects, not just online and virtual, but also going out to make site visits, whether it's the corporate office or in some of the field sites, and meeting with groups and recording their work processes and creating training videos off that. The new task for me in this role was storyline. I hadn't really had a lot of experience. I spent some time downloading the trial version and trying out storyline, but this was the first time I got to really dig in and create full projects and storyline. I also did a lot of course revision, and that was one thing that got me familiar with meeting with SMEs, was hearing what course updates they wanted, and then I'd make those updates in storyline, and then we would publish those to the LMS. And so SME collaboration, I think, was a unique thing for this role, because I was meeting not only with urban kind of corporate office employees, but I was also meeting with maintenance employees up and down the pipeline. And so SME collaboration was could be very complicated, because you had people on, like myself, on an urban schedule, and then I was meeting with SMEs who were on field schedules, who wouldn't always line up. So sometimes I had to accommodate that. And I did some in-person training facilitation. We had some workforce of skill-based classes that we were creating. So I was able to kind of build on my experience from teaching courses, and English as a second language, to work on that. So the actions that I took to kind of address some of these new challenges was I sought out a lot of mentoring and videography tasks. We were fortunate to have somebody in our HR team who had experience in videography that I could go to, get feedback, and kind of help grow in that new role as a videographer. And of course, also leveraging LinkedIn Learning. We have a company LinkedIn Learning account that I was able to take advantage of, and some of the online sources for storyline and ID processes. And as a big reader, I often turn to books as well. So a lot of IT books that I got recommendations from TLDC members and other people in my network. So the results of this second contractor role was that when I was recognized for kind of my expertise in being self-driven learner of new software and tools, and kind of recommending for my team. and kind of developing that business acumen, the larger knowledge of the organization, meeting with SMEs, building those relationships. Gained Camtasia and storyline skills. So Camtasia was a new tool to me before I came to this role. One of the tasks that I didn't talk about in the earlier slide was that I was doing a lot of screen recordings of Flash trainings. So I know a lot of people are like, Flash, that's pretty outdated. We had a lot of these trainings that were sitting on an old computer that still had the Flash player installed. So I was going through those, hitting play and recording those. In the process of doing that, which might sound like a mundane task, I was able to kind of gain some Camtasia experience and skills, and so that was kind of an important project that at first look kind of seemed very mundane and pointless, but it did help me develop those skills as well. The ultimate outcome of this second contractor role was that we had an opening within our department for a full-time learning development coordinator. And having been in that contract role, I was asked to apply for it and was able to step into a full-time learning development position through that. So I'll talk about the key takeaways, and then I'll turn it over to Melissa to kind of open it up for Q&A. I think the main thing that I take away from these two different contract roles is that they were great experiences for me to gain new skills and also gain knowledge of how these different businesses worked, whether it's IT, in this case, oil and gas, transportation, and really develop that ability to work within these different businesses and see those needs, work with the SMEs, and understand how sometimes these different ID processes that we might think of idealized, sometimes they don't work depending on how mature the organization is. And so I think that was one of the things I took away from that. Some of these tools and processes gained in these contract roles are really helpful for leveraging full-time L&D jobs. And I think my experience was that I went to these boot camps or certification programs, and I got some knowledge of the ID processes and these different approaches. But I think the practical experience of being able to go in a contract role, even though sometimes they're temporary, was really what made the difference and for me for getting set up for success when I was stepping into a full-time role. And I still rely on a lot of those experiences that I gained from my time as a contractor for the IT company, change management communications. I'm putting out SharePoint newsletters and things like that, communications, and of course using a lot of the tech tools that I gained through those two experiences as well. So I say this because sometimes I think when we were so focused on like a full-time position, we can kind of lose sight that there's other pathways to get to where we want to go. It's a full-time L&D position, or even just even if it's a freelance position, kind of look in these different pathways and seeing if one of those works for you. So hopefully by sharing these two experiences, maybe you have a better idea of how contract roles work and how they can also be paths to a full-time position. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa and see if she has some questions for me.
I do. Yeah, first, thank you so much. I think this is such a great session. Because it's so practical. And I know it's something that wasn't necessarily on my radar, that maybe people coming from higher ed, it's not something that you consider. I think so many people talk about landing the big role, your first role. And it's easy to forget that there can be a lot of steps along the way. So I think it's really helpful. So my first question is, for people who are coming from maybe from the classroom, from a very stable teaching job, what advice would you give them first for finding these contract roles, and then for, I feel like there's a little bit of a mindset shift, right? When you're a contractor versus when you're a full-time employee, what advice do you have for making that mental sort of jump?
You know, I that's kind of a hard question for me because I feel like while I did go through some steps in terms of gaining certification experience, and taking some courses, I was one fortunate that I found people through my network who were able to kind of connect me, and getting involved with TLDC and doing things like this where when I met Toddy through here, she was able to connect me through that. Um, that being said, I think there's a lot of recruiters out there who are who post these kind of contract roles, and I think trying to figure out how these different businesses you might be looking to go into source their work, and if there's contract positions. I had no idea that there was these different contractors or contract positions being posted by recruiters. And so I would look at the organization itself that I was hoping to get a job with.
Mhm.
And some of the, and I didn't realize that there was all these contractors that they were sourcing work to that had jobs posted on their websites that their recruiters might be posting on LinkedIn. So I think, I guess my one piece of advice would be trying to really get a better grasp of, if you're looking at contract roles, like how those different businesses source their work through contracts, and maybe what those companies are, and then how they hire.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks. And then let's see, Karen had a question. How do you convince hiring managers that you could do the job without experience with software and L&D, like transferable skills? What's that process like?
Mm. I think one of the things that, when I see Toddy's comment down there, recruiters who hire for contract roles will often help you discover your transferable skills so they can sell you.
Hmm.
And I think when I was working with Toddy to get that first contract role, a lot of it was her vetting me, and so kind of having that someone inside who knew, and being able to meet with her and share some of my skills, and so she had an idea of that. So that was really helpful for me. I think that's a real sticking point because sometimes it is really hard to be able to say, like, these are transferable skills, and I can do this. So I think I don't have an easy answer.
I think you make a good point. Like it depends on the situation too. And I will
Mhm.
say, Princess Small wrote, and I agree, contract work isn't for the faint of heart. It can be feast and famine, and it's owning your own business and future. In addition to being an instructional designer, now you're a business owner and marketer and everything else. I'd weigh your options carefully. I think that it's true that it is a double-edged sword, and every metaphor that I can think of for it is
Mhm.
dark, like feast and famine, sink or swim, survival of the fittest. And like there's two sides to that. I know for me, I got some opportunities um that I wouldn't have normally gotten if there had been an entire formal recruitment process and a very clear job description. I got a lot of opportunities, honestly, because there were huge projects and a tight deadline. And if you can kind of write a storyboard and you can kind of do something, like we'll try it. What's the worst that can happen? They needed sort of bodies and seats, and that's a great opportunity, I think, to prove yourself, to learn on the job. But it's also um, it's not like we just had a session with, oh, I forget the names of the speakers, but they were so great, with someone talking about their first experience. And it was a situation where it was just a nice match of someone who wanted to learn on the job and had a lot of transferable skills, and an employer who was looking for a long-term person in a position. So it was sort of the opposite of this, which has its pluses and minuses, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, Melissa. Like, contract roles can really vary. Like, there could be, like, we have contract roles in our company that are, I would say, almost kind of like permanent, as much as permanent as you can get for a contract role. Where we have a
Yeah.
need, it's like going to be ongoing for a long time, but we're using this because sometimes our business processes are pretty complex, and so having a contracted company handle some of these things can really be more efficient. So yeah, I think that the point is that they can really vary, and some of them can be feast and famine. Some of them can be kind of dark, where it's like, all right, they get laid off really quickly as a contractor, but sometimes they can be, people make careers out of contract roles. But I think one of the things is really making sure that for a contract role, you kind of have to have a lot of backup plans, and you have to have kind of run your own business, kind of be your own business owner, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is a lot of sort of admin that goes with it that doesn't if you just are, collecting your paycheck from an employer. So yeah, the good and the bad, right?
Mhm.
I had another question for you. So in the process of when you got hired to be a full-time employee where you were contracting, what was that process like? Was it a very formal, like the same as it would have been if you were an outsider? Was it more informal because they knew your work? How did that go?
You know, it was kind of informal because I was already housed within the HR team, and so once that position came open, I went through the application process.
Mhm.
But at this point, they had already sort of tried me. They had already seen my skill set. So it was not the lengthy application process that usually happens. It was more like, we understand your work. It was very streamlined.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's nice. That was my experience as well. That once
Hmm.
people have seen your work, like the whole point of an interview, right, is to know if you can, how the person's going to perform. But if it's backwards and they see that first, then generally the recruitment process, yeah, it was my experience as well.
Yeah, and I've heard that I mean, this wasn't a position that was contract to hire. I know that there are those positions out there too, where it's companies kind of have that set up where you are in a contract role, and if you do well, then the pathway is to eventually hire you. Um,
Mhm.
and that's how companies kind of vet their some of their talent before they take the kind of take the leap to hire them full
Sure.
time.
Oh, 100%. Ooh, Luis has a soul searching question. Are you ready, Randy?
Sure.
In hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently in the process?
You know, I think that first contract role, and I'm not going to get into it too much in terms of like some of the dynamics between the manager, but I think there were aspects of that towards the end that where I wasn't that supported, and um, I think I should have probably left that contract position earlier. So I say that because I think sometimes when you're first taking on your first position, you're like, well, I got to stick this out, even if it's maybe not good for my mental health and my well-being, if there's conflicts. So uh, I, I think I would have left that position earlier and tried to find something more.
Yeah, I think I see a lot of like applause emojis, and I had a similar experience. Maybe that's part of the process, making a mistake and staying too long somewhere, because I did the same thing, and then that's how you learn how to sort of set boundaries and say, okay, next time this happens, I'll react differently, and it'll go a different
Definitely.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a lot of conversations with Toddy about that.
By the way, I want to just do like a quick plug for Toddy Norum, who I know she's watching this one. Toddy, I don't know if you remember this, but you're one of the first people I talked to at TLDC a few years ago when I was transitioning, and you gave me some good advice, and you gave me a contact that ended up in a job interview, which ultimately didn't work out, but that was on me, not you. So everyone, do yourself a favor and connect with Toddy, because she's fabulous.
Definitely. Yeah, I would second that, Melissa.
Okay, another question. As a newcomer to LND, this is Vandana. As a newcomer to LND, I'm curious about career paths. Should I focus on developing one or two specialized skills to become an expert, or aim for a broader range of abilities and be more adaptable? Ooh, this is like a session in and of itself, I think.
Yeah, that is a great question. I, I have to say, when I entered this, I had no idea. I didn't know about sales enablement. I had no idea that was a whole area of L&D, um, and didn't really understand how HR, how L&D sits it within different businesses. So I kind of went into it a little bit like, well, I have some of these skills that I think transferable, and I didn't really know. So I kind of went a little bit more open-minded instead of like I'm trying to fill a certain niche. Um, so I think for contract work, sometimes it's, I met with a woman just this past week who was kind of like part of a mentoring program, and she says all these different contract roles in different parts of businesses really help develop her skill set. And she didn't really, she emphasized it was really important for her to kind of cast a broad net, instead of just trying to focus on one industry. So I guess I could see plus and minuses for both. Sometimes if you're really like, if I'm building all my skills in sales enablement, and I really focused in that area, then I'm probably going to be more employable at some point, especially in that field. But sometimes I think, especially starting out, sometimes it's good to cast a wide net if you can.
Yeah. And there's a difference between like your skill set as a learning and development person and the industry that you work in. That is another thing that Chrissy and Trish, thank you everyone for jogging my memory with the names that Chrissy and Trish talked about, that the industry, like I've done things for pharmaceuticals and sales and finance and caretaker, everything, but I've never done visual design for that because that's not my area of expertise. And like you said, I think sales enablement applies to hundreds of industries. But maybe if you're a Salesforce expert, it's one thing. And if you're a videographer, it's another thing. And if you're, it depends on what you feel like doing. I like having a wide net as well, but I think I did it the opposite way, that I have like a short list of things I don't especially enjoy doing. And so I just have things on my no thank you list, really.
Definitely. Yeah. I think I've started to develop that short list too, where I'm like, I could be okay if I don't do a lot of LMS management,
Yeah, there are a lot of things that if you know enough to have a conversation about them, I think, and to follow along when someone else has an opinion, I feel like that's,
yeah, definitely.
You can go, what is it, like the T-shape? You can know a lot about some things and less about the others. All right. What else? Any other questions?
I was just going to comment on what I noticed Toddy mentioned. Sometimes you find things you love in contract roles. And she talks about, because of Cisco, I became a Scrum certified, and it's a great add-on. And I found that being in like a change management analyst role, like having that exposure to, like, they had a whole area of the business that was just focused on change management. It was kind of more on organizational level, and then you had individual groups of teams that were enacted with change management and L&D kind of combined. And I think because of that, it kind of helped me realize how important having some of those aspects in just an overall process of needs analysis, and thinking about well, if you're going to have change in the software, what is your long-term plans for those changes? How are you going to support that? And so, just kind of like Toddy says, I think having some of those different contract roles can feed into different experience. You can pick up little things from that can apply to other, even different industries.
Yeah, I agree with that too. There's so many things that are like on the periphery that are interesting. I just did a sort of LinkedIn project management certification because I was doing bits and pieces of it, but I thought, it's another nice add-on. I want to know more. I want to understand all the conversations about the strategy. And there's so many things like that. There's so many opportunities to do a little more and push your knowledge a little bit further. And that's great.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think those aspects of like project management and ID processes, I think from those two different contract roles, I realized that, sometimes you come in this idea, like whether it's ADDIE, SAM, or whatever model or even Agile, sometimes working in those contract roles helped me see that, well, I have this idealized version of, what the industry says is best practices, but maybe the work environment you're in is not mature enough for that, or it doesn't fit with their processes. And that's where the reality kind of like those two meet, and then you try to figure out how to work within those confines. And I think that's another benefit of having these contract roles is you get a sense of that, even if they're short term. You're like, oh, this doesn't really work for this.
Yeah. Oh, I had the same experience. That's such a great point, because a lot of what we see is people talking about like the perfect state and all the things that I sort of learned from the boot camps and the courses and the podcasts and things were that, right? Oh, L&D, you shouldn't be an order taker and you're the boss of what's on the training, and this is Addy and this is agile, and make sure that it's done the way it's supposed to be done. And then a lot of times within the first hour of wherever you are, the reality is a lot different. And it's a great learning experience, and also for future roles to be able to speak about the divide between the ideal theory and the way things work in real life. Like that's a way of showing that you're experienced and that you've done this. So it's jarring, right? But it's important, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. And I continue to work on that. I think I'll probably be working on that for a lot, is like, how can I make my process better within these confines?
Yeah. What's the saying about that creativity is best when you have limitations, or when you have someone smarter than me says it more concisely, but to do something nice and creative within the confines of whatever your particular situation is, it really helps you develop those muscles.
Yeah. I was seeing how Cindy was mentioning that storyline resources from Ashley Shieson. Yeah, and for anybody that's looking for storyline resources, that is a great one. I follow her on LinkedIn, and Ashley's got some great storyline tutorials, and that's what I went to some of her storyline resources when I was trying to improve my storyline skills, and still go to them quite often.
Great. All right. What else? Is there anything else you want to add that we haven't touched on yet, Randy?
Let's see. I'm going to look at my notes real quick. I wrote all my notes down and then didn't really look at them so much when I go through there, which is pretty typical for me. It's kind of a way to get it all out there.
Yeah, it's part of the process, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I didn't, in all transparency, I didn't have a portfolio of work for both of these contract roles. And I just say that because sometimes I think a lot of these IDE boot camps are like, you must have a portfolio. And I think it's good to have one. But I think it's good to recognize too that not every industry looks at learning development roles the same way. You might start getting the perception of looking on LinkedIn and that everybody needs to have a portfolio. And that's the only way you're going to get work.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I actually don't have a portfolio either. I had a really rudimentary one of some things I did with my trial version of Beyond and Rise and things. But the first contract role I got was I showed them a storyboard that I was working on and talked through it. And then everything I've done for the past few years, I couldn't use any of it for a portfolio anyways, because it was all under the client has confidentiality clauses and everything else. But I don't know, this might be controversial as well, but I feel like that's really important if you're going into visual design, or if you're going to be doing sort of nothing but storyline and then want to make sure that you're amazing at it, But that's true. You do hear you need a portfolio and you need a portfolio. I don't know. I don't have a portfolio.
I know. I spent so much time when I first was looking to leave the classroom, just working on a website.
Me too.
Watching a bunch of videos about creating portfolio assets. And it wasn't until I really started networking and going to some of these TLDC events and being like, okay, this is another way I can move, towards my goal. Instead of, I felt like I was kind of languishing in this, I have to have the portfolio piece or I'm not going to get hired. And then it just kind of delayed the process of me of actually taking action to get a job.
Yeah, that was one of my things as well. And I remember making a decision and saying okay, I'm mediocre at Rise and mediocre at Beyond, and I can kind of write a storyboard. It's not so different from a lesson plan. And I remember kind of deciding I want to learn the rest of this while I'm getting paid. Like I got paid very little my first job because I had no experience. And I kind of said, you know what, that's fair. Like, why don't I do it for a couple of months at this rate that was less than what I was making when I was teaching? And let's talk about it again in a few months. But yeah, I just, like you fuss with it so much and you get into your head about it. And then it's like, oh, what am I doing? Let's go.
Yeah. And I also wonder sometimes about coming from an education background where we have everything's kind of like these neat objectives, these, our yearly plan, our lessons plans, and these models that we kind of gravitate towards something that's like, oh, it's defined. This is the process. This is the, and I think sometimes there's, like you said, like it's not always that way. And I think it's good to recognize that, you don't always need a portfolio or a boot camp or something like that.
Right. And Toddy has good advice, as always, says this is where your hero stories come on your resume. Each of us has had amazing wins. If you can't share your actual work, you can describe the incredible outcomes in your resume. That's great. And Christina is a fellow get in your head or get out of your head, Christina.
Yeah, I agree with that, Christina. Yeah, and Cindy mentions this too, that many people in LD roles do not have portfolios. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Give everyone another minute in case anyone, imposter syndrome is real. It is. Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
I think there are many, if you go through the PLDC playlist, there's many sessions where people talk about imposter syndrome, especially when you're in a career transition. It's normal, I think.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, one of the other career transitions I made was I left the military to civilian. And I think there's a lot in that community too, to talk about kind of the imposter syndrome of trying to step into a new role. So I think it's part of that transitioning to an entire career is to really feel that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. See, there's another perspective. Tabitha says our team will not look at someone who doesn't have a portfolio because we want to see what they can do that aligns to the work we do. So there's two sides to this, right? Randy and I don't have portfolios. We're not telling you not to have a portfolio. Like it's definitely, a bonus. Yeah. My portfolio. Bernadette, if you have something on your portfolio, it's complete. Go. Don't fuss with it. I was looking at the colors and I don't know.
David says, can I leverage a background in video editing and teaching animation? If so, how? I'd say yes, David.
Oh, Randy froze for me. I don't know which one of us is frozen.
Is mostly. Oh, am I back?
You're back.
Okay. So as I was addressing David's question, I found that right now within my team that everybody kind of has different focuses, and mine's been a bit more on the software training development support and video-based solutions. So I'm using tools like Vyond and Camtasia and also Adobe Premiere to edit and produce videos. So I think you can really focus in one area depending on the needs of the team that you end up going on.
Yeah, and also I would say adding to that, like you snuck in there, David, that you teach animation. So if you're teaching people a skill, that's huge as well. And that's knowing about all the steps that it takes to get someone, to perform. So that's super transferable, I would say.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's really important, being able to teach someone that.
Yeah, someone else, I think we're stirring up controversy with the portfolio comment. Yeah, that just says, I feel most e-learning specialists have portfolios. That's a good point. If you're going to be producing a lot of e-learning, that's a fast and easy way to get, considered for a job. That's true.
Yeah, and I think it's good that they're pushing back on this. I'm just sharing my experiences.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's like, I know for me, I had the same experience as Christina, where I really was like, oh, I have to become an excellent sort of graphic designer and developer and all the things that are not my skill set at all. And that I think that was holding me back a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Um, just reading through the
I know
comments
the
here.
chat is so active. Sorry. Yeah, it was e-learning specialist. Yeah, typical curriculum and L&D haven't. Yeah, I've always been much more to Tanasha's point about for e-learning specialists. I've always been much more on the curriculum and content design
Hmm.
than e-learning per se. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if I was to probably go out and try to find a position doing a lot of the video work, I'd probably have to I'd probably be looking at putting together a portfolio of video samples of some of the training videos. But like you said, I'm in a place where I can't share that information, you know.
Yeah.
I'd
And
have to create samples that are kind of based loosely on the type of stuff that I do.
right, yeah. And actually Tabitha mentioned that it doesn't need to be like a beautiful website. It can be a Google Doc with a few links out to showcase projects. So it doesn't have to be, you know,
Hmm.
a huge thing, just a few samples.
Definitely.
Yeah, and Cindy said, yeah, you can put projects on your LinkedIn page. That's a great idea too. Instead of exactly, Cindy, instead of getting hung up building a full website. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And then Tabitha says, don't let great be the enemy of good. That's amazing. We should all tattoo that on our foreheads.
Yeah, I remember when I first was getting out of teaching, I spent a lot of time. I think I had a WordPress site, and I got so wrapped up in the development of the WordPress site. I spent weeks trying to learn WordPress, maybe months. And I was like, what am I doing? You know, it
Yeah.
had to be perfect. There was
Yeah.
a comment from, was it Vidana? Um, she asked, I'm curious to know what are some, oh, hey, nope moments you've encountered in contracts that have saved you from a bad deal. Um, Interesting.
I know the mistake that I made as a brand new instructional designer was when my first job was a project that had a flat fee. That didn't sound like a lot of money for the project, even for me being inexperienced. But
Hmm.
then, saying yes and getting into it, and then it took so much longer than I thought it would. And there were so many more like hidden. I didn't know enough to ask about things like, well, how many revision cycles are there and how much feedback and how much I just didn't know. And I ended up making sort of less than $10 an hour on this
Oh, wow.
big, like complete course with beyond animations and everything. Um, but that's one of those things that I think I did it once and I didn't do it again. I know more experienced designers actually say the opposite, like freelancers, and say no, they prefer to do things with a flat project fee because they know what they're doing. I didn't know what I was doing.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
so it was
and
a
I think you
learning.
bring up a good point, Melissa, is that like some of those things in terms of scoping and thinking about pricing, and kind of knowing what I feel like that's a place where if I was to step into like maybe my first role again, I'd probably want to have a couple different people that I could kind of lean on to as like sort of that mentoring role and people who have been through that. So I think it kind of goes back to like really the importance of having, a pretty robust network to do something like this. Um, Otherwise, like you do end up like finding yourself in situations that maybe are less desirable.
Yeah. Yeah. And not to say don't take projects that are flat fees because a lot of people
Hmm.
do well with that. And even if I had to do it over again, I think I would have done it over. I was so excited to have the experience, but then I just wouldn't repeat the experience.
Yeah. And I struggled with, this is not totally related, but just like the whole thinking about negotiating with, over your salary and like walking to that. I think that's something in higher ed or education in general. It's like, well, here it is. This is your salary. There's no
Yeah.
negotiating for the most part. And so I think that was another thing that going into contract roles, like I would have really liked to have had more experience and more knowledge and maybe being able to talk to people. And I think sometimes culturally people are, it can change to how people talk about salaries and how comfortable they feel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely another area that I think going into contract roles, I'd want to have some people in my corner.
Yeah, I agree. It's so important to, like Christy mentioned, do your research, know what's normal. And another thing that I've done that's like could have gone either way is said when I was starting, I got offered a really low rate that I knew was below market value. And I said, listen, I'll do this project that was like 2-month long project for that rate, but then I want to talk about my rate again.
Mm-hmm.
But like, before we, and because then like you come, if the project goes well and you work extra hard and everything goes the way you want it to, then you're in a great position to say, okay, now where are we? And I found for me that to set the expectation of when I was going to have the conversation again helped me like not have it hanging over my head and feeling bad about it and letting like a year go by where I wasn't happy with my pay,
Yeah, is that I've been in some of those situations with other jobs, and it's not a good feeling to have.
No,
Where
no,
you're like,
no.
I wish I would have,
Yeah. And it's a two-way street too, because like contractors who are good at their job, they're really valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's harder for companies to offer someone a really great rate without being familiar with not just like the results of their work that you could see from a portfolio or from a sample, but with the way that they work and, how they are with the sneeze, how they are with the deadline, how they are, with their teammates and that kind of thing. And once you experience that and have a good experience with someone, when the person says, hey, it's 2024, it's a brand new day, here's my new rate, it's a lot easier to make that work in the company with someone who's proven themselves.
Yeah, and I think I'm curious to know, Melissa, like when you've been in some of those roles, do you have a way of kind of like keeping track of what some of that value add is something? So if you're facing that conversation later or renegotiating, it's something I've just been thinking about because we did our performance reviews, and I'm thinking about like how do you capture that?
That's a good question. I like the way I've managed to like get the salary bumps I've had has been through talking to other people and having some transparent conversations about what other people are making and what the going rate is. And I have a few really great women contacts and friends in the industry, and transparency with your salary, not within your company, but among your colleagues that you trust. I think that goes a long way, especially for women who are traditionally not paid as much as we should be. So it's like a weird thing, and it's kind of an uncomfortable thing at first, but to like, I had a friend who we were both looking for jobs at the same time, and we were both sort of figuring out, contract things and offers at the same time. And we just sort of talked about, this is what I got offered. This is what did you get offered? Is that a little? Is that a lot? Let's talk to someone else. And to like lay it all out there within your sort of inner circle, that was really empowering. So get an inner circle and everyone talk about how much money you make is my advice.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and I wish more people would be willing to do that. I think it's really special to have an inner circle like you're describing, and I think especially for groups that sometimes where some of the salaries are not equable to other groups.
Yeah. Ooh, and Princess Mall just posted a link to Christy Tucker's blog, which if you're looking for people to follow, Christy Tucker has a blog about everything you've ever thought of related to learning and development and a million other things that I've never thought of. One of them is the hourly rates and salary, and Princess Mall just posted the link to that. So that's a great resource too.
Yeah, I'd second that, Melissa. Some of the work she's done in scenario-based training is really next level, and someday I hope to be that great at doing scenario-based stuff as she is. Yeah,
she is.
Looks like we got coming up on time.
Yeah, we've just about filled this whole hour.
Yeah. Well, I guess to kind of close this out, I just want to say how thankful I am for Louise for giving this opportunity, Melissa for moderating, Toddy again, like for connecting me to this my first role, and just the TLDC community has been really great, and I wouldn't be where I'm at today without Louise and this TLDC community.
Yeah,
And that's the truth.
Yeah, and it's a great, like, I would encourage everyone to become a member, and it's been invaluable. I love it. So
Yep.
Thanks, you guys. I really appreciate that. No, this is great. I mean, what a great conversation. There was so much going on in chat, and I really do think that this ideally is a lot of how these sessions at TLDC work, where it really is community produced. And I really love the fact that there's so many seasoned L&D professionals that are in the audience that are just there to help. And I think that's how you kind of filter your professional development. Like when you're looking for communities, is just find places like this. I mean, hopefully TLDC isn't the only one that has this kind of a dynamic, because I mean, I think it should be kind of the standard, but I do think that you can really get some quality help by just coming to our events and just participating. And yeah, thanks, Toddy. All right. Well, yeah, you guys pretty much hit time. I was really impressed. Thank you so much again, Randy. Melissa, thanks for helping host and moderate. And yeah, next one we have an interesting one coming up. This one is with Mark Pasadilla, which is optimizing LinkedIn, adrenaline for your networking. Yeah, let's see how that one goes. I'm not a big LinkedIn person, so I'm kind of curious as to what he has to say. And so hopefully we'll see everybody in that next one. All right.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.